This is 400 Seconds per podcast. Compact conversations with extraordinary women leading hope and change in the climate crisis. I'm Chris Fittick. Food waste is one of the biggest problems facing the planet. For this episode, Jo Mary Watson spoke to Tessa Clarke, co-founder of OLIO, the #1 free sharing app whose 5 million users have so far shared over 34 million portions of food and saved over 5 billion litres of water. Jo began by asking Tessa what inspired her to start OLIO.
So I'm a farmer's daughter, and I grew up learning firsthand just how much hard work goes into producing the food that we all eat every day, and many of us take for granted. And as a result of that, I have a pathological hatred of food waste. And so I found myself 7 years ago now, when I was moving country and the removal men told me I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. I was not prepared to do that. So I set out into the streets to try and find someone to give my food to. Unfortunately, I failed miserably, but I wasn't to be defeated. I went back to my apartment, and when the guys weren't looking, I smuggled the non-perishable food into the bottom of my packing boxes. And that was the moment in time when I thought, this is crazy. I am going to these extreme lengths to avoid throwing away this food. Why isn't there a simple app that connects people with their neighbours so they can give food away rather than throw it away? And obviously now there is.
What are you most proud of, or what do you consider your biggest achievement?
Well, without a doubt, founding OLIO and growing it to where it is today has been mine and my co-founder Sasha's greatest achievement. So we now have over 5 million people who are in the OLIO community, and collectively they have given away 35 million portions of food and 3 million other household items. And this has had an environmental impact equivalent to taking over 100 million car miles off the road. And it has also saved 5 billion litres of water. I think that's just incredibly powerful, because we are at the moment doing 0.001% of our full potential. I imagine that most of your listeners are not yet using OLIO to give stuff away instead of throw it away. And so just think of what we can achieve when we scale this up and when we get to billions of people.
What can we and our listeners do to make a difference?
I think the most important thing your audience can do is to really embrace and internalize the fact that every time they spend £1, they are voting for the world that they want. And they can either continue to vote for the status quo, which is destroying the planet and taking humanity racing towards extinction, or they can move their money and spend it somewhere where it's going to have a good positive effect. And the other thing I'd encourage everyone to do is to really reevaluate their relationship with consumption. So I'm not sure if you're aware of the concept of Earth Overshoot Day, but that is the day in the year in which humanity has used all the resources that the Earth can replenish in a year. When it was first measured in the late 60s, Earth Overshoot Day was the 31st of December. So what that means is humanity used in a year what the Earth could replenish in a year. If you fast forward to this year, Earth Overshoot Day was the 29th of July, which clearly cannot continue. So I encourage absolutely everybody to stop. And instead of buying something brand new, think, well, what do I already have? Or what does someone in my community already have that I can borrow or use instead of buying something brand new?
Could you tell our listeners some facts or statistics regarding food waste and its scope in the UK? For example, how much food gets thrown away per family per year?
Yeah, so sadly, it's not an exaggeration to say that food waste is one of the biggest problems facing humanity today. And the reason for that is because globally, and it's the same here in the UK, we throw away over 1/3 of all the food we produce. Meanwhile, we have 800 million people who are going to bed hungry every night, who could be fed on just 1/4 of the food that we waste in the Western world. And as if all of that weren't bad enough, the environmental impact of food waste is nothing short of devastating. If it were to be a country, food waste would be the 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And the reason for that is because a landmass larger than China is used every single year to grow food that's never eaten. That is soil that has been degraded, indigenous populations that have been displaced, land that has been deforested, species that have been driven into extinction. 1/4 of humanity's fresh water is used to grow food that's never eaten. That food then goes on an enormously long supply chain, and when the vast majority of it ends up in landfill, it decomposes without access to oxygen, which creates methane, which is 25 times more deadly than CO2. And here in a country such as the UK, what most people would be stunned to discover is the fact that half of all food waste takes place in the home. So that means that we, each and every one of us, we are half of that problem that I have just described. So a typical British family is throwing away just over 20% of their weekly shop, which is worth over £700 sterling per family per year, and collectively adds up to £14 billion being thrown away, which is utter madness. And that is in stark contrast, by the way, to retail stores, because most people assume that most food waste takes place at a retail store level, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Retail stores generate just 2% of all food waste. And that's because there's only about 10 or 15,000 of them throwing away half a percentage point, in contrast to 28 million of us, 28 million households throwing away 20% of the weekly shop. So on the one hand, that's incredibly depressing. Gosh, we are individually responsible for half of that problem I've just outlined. But if you flip it on its head, it can be incredibly exciting. That means that we can be half the solution. If we just empower people to stand up and to change how they're acting and what they're doing, then we don't have to wait for governments. We don't have to wait for businesses. We can solve one of the biggest problems facing humanity today, starting right now.
400 Parts Per Million is an ecological arts project by Theatre in the Rough. Join us online from the 26th to 27th of March 2022 at 400.earth, supported by Arts Council England and the PH Holt Foundation.